For hundreds of thousands of years, this valley belonged to the Neanderthals. They knew where the animals crossed in winter. They knew which stone broke into the sharpest edge, and which cave stayed dry when the snow began to fall. Then, one season, something changed. New footprints appeared beside the river. A different kind of blade lay near an abandoned hearth, and on a distant ridge, smoke rose from a camp that had never been there before. Homo sapiens had arrived. A few thousand years later, the Neanderthals were gone as a distinct population. It sounds like the beginning of a simple story. One human species entered Europe. Another disappeared. But nothing about the final Neanderthals was simple. For generations, they were portrayed as failed humans, slow, violent, and too primitive to survive beside us. That image was built partly from old reconstructions, damaged skeletons, and the assumption that extinction must prove inferiority. Archaeology tells a different story. Neanderthals hunted powerful animals at close range. They shaped stone with planning and precision. They used fire, worked hides, selected wood, and twisted plant fibers into cord. These were not random actions. They required memory, skill, and knowledge passed between people. Some injured Neanderthals survived long after they could have lived easily on their own. Children grew inside communities where tools, roots, and dangers had to be learned. They were capable, so capability alone could not save them. The first major problem may have been numbers. Imagine an entire community made of only a few families. One experienced hunter dies. One mother has no surviving children. A winter blocks the path to the next valley. A connection between two groups disappears. In a large population, these events are painful. In a tiny population, they can change the future. At Chagirskaya Cave in Siberia, ancient DNA revealed a community that included close relatives. One father lived with his daughter. Other individuals were connected through family relationships. N. Then a genetic pattern suggests a small community. And possibly women moving between groups. N. And for a moment, it seemed like the answer had arrived. N. Perhaps Neanderthals were trapped in isolated families, slowly damaged by inbreeding until they could no longer survive. N. But the newest evidence refuses to make the story that easy. ND, recovered from late Neanderthals in Belgium and France, reveals people who were not all closely related. Some appear to have belonged to larger or better connected regional populations. N. Their genomes do not show a steady buildup of harmful genetic damage as extinction approached. N. No small numbers mattered. N. But not every Neanderthal community was the same. N. NAND. While their populations were under pressure, the world around them refused to remain stable. N. Late Ice Age Europe could change within. A human lifetime. N. Open grassland became woodland. Cold, dry winds gave way to wetter periods. Herds shifted their routes. A valley that supported hunters for generations could suddenly offer far less food. In parts of Iberia, declining plant productivity reduced the amount of herbivore biomass the landscape could support. N. Fewer animals meant fewer opportunities for hunters. N. For a small community, losing access to one major prey route could break connections, reduce food, and force families to move. N. But climate cannot be the single answer. N. In southern Italy, environmental records show relatively stable rainfall and vegetation during the period when Neanderthals disappeared. N. They did not vanish only from frozen wastelands. N. Nusum disappeared from places where humans could still live. N. Nuthen came the newcomers. N. More than 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens entered Europe in small groups. They carried children, stone tools, hides, and memories of landscapes far to the east. N. They were not an army, and they did not sweep across Europe in one unstoppable line. Some early Homo sapiens populations failed too, but for several thousand years, the two human lineages overlapped. Sometimes they may have seen one another directly. Sometimes they only found the other group's footprints, tools, or abandoned fires. And sometimes they needed the same things: the same river crossing, the same sheltered cave, the same herds, the same piece of high-quality stone. Competition does not require a battle. A group can lose without ever seeing its competitor. One population arrives earlier at the hunting ground. One has relatives in another valley. One receives new tools or information after a bad season. The other remains alone. Both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens made effective tools. There is no single blade, spear, or invention that explains everything. The difference may have been what existed around the tools. Some Homo sapiens communities appear to have maintained wider networks. Materials and ornaments moved across long distances. Information, partners, and assistance may have traveled with them. A wider network works like insurance. When one camp fails, another can help. When one route closes, information about another may already exist. When population numbers fall, connections can bring new people into the group. A small advantage does not look dramatic in 1 year. Across hundreds of generations, it can transform an entire continent. Imagine two populations living in the same unstable world. One is only slightly larger, its groups reconnect slightly more often, its children survive at a slightly higher rate. After 1 generation, the difference is almost invisible. After 50 generations, it is not. But the Neanderthals were not simply being pushed aside, they were also becoming part of the newcomers. Ancient genomes place a major period of interbreeding between Neanderthals and the ancestors of many people outside Africa between roughly 45 and 49,000 years ago. This was not a distant, abstract event. Some early Homo sapiens in Europe had Neanderthal ancestors only a few generations before they were born. A parent, a grandparent. A family history that crossed the boundary between two human lineages. So what does extinction mean when the population does not completely disappear, but is absorbed? Imagine a Neanderthal community of 20 people living near a growing network of several hundred Homo sapiens. Children are born between the groups. Families move. Over generations, the Neanderthal community stops existing as a separate population, but parts of its ancestry continue. This may have happened again and again. Not everywhere, not in the same way, but often enough that Neanderthal DNA remains in living people today. The archaeological record does not show one final battlefield. It shows regional disappearances. A shelter is used for the last time. A tool tradition ends. A valley no longer contains Neanderthal remains. Across much of Europe, this process unfolded over thousands of years, with the final populations disappearing at different times in different regions. There may have been moments of violence. Humans have always competed, feared strangers, and defended resources. But there is no evidence of one organized campaign in which Homo sapiens hunted every Neanderthal to extinction. The real process was slower, and probably more powerful. Small populations, changing ecosystems, competition for the same resources, different levels of connection, interbreeding, and chance. One storm, one failed hunt, one generation with too few children. None of these causes everything. Together, they can end a lineage. Even now, the evidence continues to change the answer. One cave reveals an isolated family. Another region reveals connected populations. One climate record shows ecological decline. Another shows stable conditions. The last Neanderthals did not share one identical fate. Some communities may have failed during environmental crisis. Some may have lost competition for resources. Some may have been absorbed into expanding Homo sapiens populations. Most likely, all these processes happened somewhere. By around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals no longer existed as a separate population. But extinction is not the same as erasure. They remain in tools shaped by their hands, in caves where their families gathered, in DNA carried by millions of living people. Neanderthals disappeared, but part of their story continued inside ours.